A good horror game is something special. It is not able just to challenge us with its gameplay or tell a good story, but to scare us, to haunt our dreams and idle thoughts, even to make us question our own perceptions of reality. In this podcast, we meet the developers of both existing popular horror titles and hotly anticipated upcoming games to discuss how they do it, what inspires them, and all things spooky and unnerving. Welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards.
Hello and welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. I'm Phil, and today joined by my co-host Ash.
Hi!
And we are privileged to be talking to Chantal and Tony about the game darkwebSTREAMER. So thank you very much for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So before we kind of dive into the game itself, do you want to kind of give a bit of an introduction about yourselves and how you got into this and where you come from, like in terms of game dev?
Yes, I'll start so I can segue attorney. I think we started making the game in 2021, and by me, it was actually me and a friend I had met playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I was in my final year of an anthropology degree and an English degree as well, but I focused on the anthropology. I don't know why. But yeah, just needed an escape, and my friend Ryan Truk and I were like working on a tabletop role-playing game that kind of put my game in my brain in game designer mode. And then I was in the middle of the night watching a B horror movie no one has ever heard before. I'm gonna name it because I have, in 3 years, never once found someone who has seen this movie. It's called Dybbuk Box: The Story of Chris Chambers. And I'll give you a second.
I haven't heard of that one. I know the Dybbuk Box story from The Possession, but only the mainstream one. So I mean, and now I've got a recommendation to go off. So
yeah. Do it, because the more time passes, the more I think that I just made it up in my head. But it was on Amazon Prime, I swear. But yeah, so I think it was 2 a.m. I watched this movie by myself, and all of a sudden, I get a vision, and this vision is of a video game. And that was very odd because I've never made a video game in my life before. But I saw it, I knew exactly what it looked like, how it would play, and I messaged my friend, Ryan, and I was like, I just had the best idea for a video game ever. And then I got a response from him when he woke up, and it was, let's do it. And it's funny because we kind of have a screenshot of this little exchange, kind of our little touchstone. And my response was, but neither of us knows how to make games. And he replied, I'm sure we can figure it out. and a few years later, here we are. So yeah, posted the game up. In past lives, I've been a graphic designer, website designer, etc. So I was able to throw together some art and some cool concept stuff, and Ryan started learning to program in GameMaker. And yeah, we managed to cobble together something that looked kind of like the beginning of a game. Threw it up on social media. People got very excited. And then it just kind of ran away, and we started getting publishers contacting us, asking us for pitch decks. I had no idea what a pitch deck was at the time. So all of a sudden we were kind of getting crash coursed into like real game making and real game development. And yeah, after a little bit of that, we ended up showing at PAX and some Gamescom, and we got a lot of hype around that. At which point we were like, "Oh shit, we're making a real game!" And that was when we brought on Turney, because darkwebSTREAMER is a complex game, as we will get to, I'm sure, in a bit. But it quickly kind of exceeded the technical level that we were at on our own, and Turney is something of a Unity god. And so, yeah, I had met Turney through, that's a long story, actually. We'll segue that one. Some technology that I built for the game got a lot of investor interest apart from darkwebSTREAMER, at which point I found Turney. And he was really into both linguistic and narrative procedural generation stuff, as well as um, being a toolmaker. So someone who makes technology to make cool narrative things possible for writers and storytellers. And yeah, so I had met him through that. And when we needed a technical god, I was like, Turney, please come save us from ourselves. And that's where Turney gets to tell his story.
So, as Chantal mentioned, I run a game development tools company called Pixel Crushers, and we focus on narrative and AI tools. By AI, not so much generative AI, but the kind of technologies that Chantal is interested in, which is simulating relationships, emotions, and tying that into narrative and dialogue. So I felt like it was a great fit, and it's been a wonderful experience working on darkwebSTREAMER.
Yep. And no comment on whether the technical god description is apt.
Just a guy who likes programming.
He's very humble. Don't worry, I'll
humble
brag
god,
for him.
a humble god. That's what we need. I love that it came up twice. That like you're definitely a god. Like I'm so interested in darkwebSTREAMER as a whole as well. I feel like that kind of eldritch tech god would tie into that theme as well.
Lurking in the shadows, never admitting he exists.
Yeah, I think compared to all the Eldritch gods, I might be a bit of a bland one.
That's exactly what an eldritch god would say, you know? Hiding in plain sight.
So, you started off doing this in Game Maker, you mentioned, and then like talking about like Tony's expertise, like in terms of Unity. So, what was that like? You were effectively developing the game in using two separate engines, or?
Well, Ryan, the original programmer for the Game Maker Studio version, did a fantastic job. And especially considering that this was his first experience in game programming, it was quite easy to take what he had built and the vision, excuse me, the vision shared by him and Chantal, and port it over to Unity, which will allow us to deploy to different platforms, to expand the reach of the game, and also just to build a more complex structure to be able to accomplish all of the really interesting narrative goals that Chantal has for the game.
I feel like talking about the narrative goals, like how would you describe kind of darkwebSTREAMER as a game? Because looking at the trailers and the stuff we've seen so far, it's so creepy and evocative, and like it pulls loads of different threads that I have no idea where it's going to go, which is really exciting for a horror game. It looks completely unlike anything else. It looks like Unfriended, the game, with extra like bits thrown on top from all the narrative side of it. So how would you describe playing darkwebSTREAMER?
Chantal, I think that's the best question for you.
It is the whole purpose of darkwebSTREAMER is to be a game that never gives you the same experience twice. And going into designing the game, that was one thing I was always very cognizant of wanting to do, and that was making a game unlike any game that has ever existed before, in a very literal way. I didn't want it to be based on something. I didn't want it to be, you can point to it and be like, oh, it's like a new version of this game. I wanted to kind of show people that even in, the 2020s, we can still pioneer experiences. We can still, experience games unlike any we've kind of ever touched before. So, it makes me feel good when you say, you haven't really seen anything like it, because mission accomplished. So essentially, for those who are unfamiliar, which is I'm sure plenty of people, we call darkwebSTREAMER a psychological horror RPG streamer simulation game. But on top of that, and because I don't like to add too many labels in the one sentence, the other kind of major part of it is I call it a narrative roguelite game. And, basically what that means is we have this game that is in some ways fundamentally a roguelite. So it is permadeath. It has fairly short playthroughs. Every single time you play the game, it is extremely different. Your strategy is going to change based on a lot of procedural generation and randomization that happens when you load up the game. So no two playthroughs are alike. But, looking at the game, you probably wouldn't guess it because it doesn't have a dungeon. You don't have a character that moves around the screen the way you would expect. And so the way I try to communicate this to people is that you need to look at the internet as the dungeon. So you're actually exploring the internet as you play the game. So the game is kind of two components. One is you are playing as an occult streamer on the dark web. Your job is to go onto the internet, find the weirdest, creepiest shit you can find, and then bring it back to your stream and try to entertain people enough to become the #1 ranked screener on the dark web. However, the supernatural is real, so the more you kind of engage with the darkness and supernaturality of the internet, the more it will engage with you. And yeah, so the narrative part of the roguelite comes in with these procedural narrative systems that we have created. And those were fundamentally born out of I'm for things very strongly at once. One, I'm a writer. That's kind of like, that's my main thing. As a creative, I've always, when I was a little girl, I thought I would grow up and be a novelist. Turns out I'm a storyteller, not a writer. So I'm a writer. I'm an anthropologist. So I'm very, very interested in not just like human psychology, which I am, but really like culture. So how we engage with other people and what kind of cultural dynamics look like between people, which is where we're really interested in this game, and it's exploring influencer culture as well as kind of just like internet culture with a particular eye to the old internet. And the other two things I am, one is a web designer. So we kind of shoved this mad experiment in where we have created the world's first procedurally generated internet. And actually forget what the fourth thing was. So let's pretend that we're gonna slide in a fourth thing right now.
Well, I'm surely horror fan is a part of that. Like, I can see the Chucky shirts on, and the Dibbert box was
without
inspo.
saying.
We can just add that
I am
one
a big horror fan.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was obvious. Yeah, no, literally when I was, I think 4 or 5. No, it was 4. When I was 4, my favorite horror movie was Child's Play. So the the Chucky movie. I had a Chucky doll. My family really, they thought it was very amusing that they had like the weird little horror girl. So they just leaned into it. So, I like would have the Chucky doll that I walked around with. And then they took it away because I used to throw it in the bath with my little brother and he'd have horrible nightmares.
So
And
you've been making
yeah.
horror experiences since you were 4 years old. That's the takeaway. That's so fun.
Exactly. It was mere generosity I was showing my brother. That was all.
Yeah, not torment at all.
Cultivated and no. I'm sure he'd have words for that. But yeah, so darkwebSTREAMER is like it's a game in which I did remember the fourth thing. So I have a lot of academic experience in what was known as the digital humanities, which was basically machine learning techniques as applied to humanities. So like the English language and creative stuff like machine learning applied to books and art and old letters and things like this. So I was quite aware, and this was long before the GPT technology came out, etc. So while I'm not a god at programming like some people, I have been familiar with kind of the theory behind some of this stuff. So kind of leaning on my background in English and linguistics with kind of a layer of my training in anthropology. I kind of began to imagine this narrative technology that could generate, not just experiences for people, but language and things like this. And that it's interesting how commonplace it is today because we got used to things like ChatGPT so incredibly quickly. But when we started developing darkwebSTREAMER, that stuff wasn't out there. So when we set out to make the game, we were like the only ones doing really deep, like dialogue generation. There are some really great games like Caves of Cud and Dwarf Fortress that were doing really cool things with narrative generation, but we initially started out really focused on like dialogue generation, so being able to talk to NPCs and have them say interesting things back and have them kind of be able to respond in real time with some level of uniqueness and intelligence. Yeah, so darkwebSTREAMER is kind of a batshit game that is like trying to kill you. It's a simulation game where you are being a streamer. You are, trying to get viewers. You're trying to earn subscribers. You're trying to get those donations. You're trying to get your money up. You're trying to ascend the ranks. You're managing all these different things, but at the same time, things are trying to kill you. You're trying to stay alive. You're trying to stay sane, and that's where these kind of RPG mechanics come in, where you are managing your stats that are helping keep you alive, helping you kind of succeed or fail in different things you're trying to do, and then you're surfing the internet to try to find things to help you. So not just to stream, but we have things called services. So that's very much, a lot of our inspiration for services on the internet and kind of like randomized gameplay mechanics, roguelite style, came from Slay the Spire. People would never look at darkwebSTREAMER and guess like, oh, Slay the Spire is a big inspiration on this game. But I really loved how every time you go through a run, you have all these different effects that you can collect, and they kind of interfere with each other, and you're trying to balance what kind of buffs and debuffs are affecting your playthrough as you go through. And so I kind of like applied that thinking to the internet in our game, where I was like, well, what if you can collect these different services? So you find a website and it's a doctor or it's a therapist, or it's a website where you can sell your blood for money. And every time you play, you're actually finding different websites. So you're going to have different mechanics available to you, and you're going to have to manage those every single time you're playing, and you're going to have to adapt your strategy based on what you're finding on this strange internet. Yeah, sorry, that was an incredibly long description.
I love how it's like the real internet, like as in if you dug, I guess you could find stuff like that, but that it's all together in one place is like, oh, I love the sound of it. I'm dead excited. I love like found footage, and this feels very much like a found footage horror game, in like all the best ways. To squash it into a niche, but I'm sure it stretches further than that.
Found footage is my favorite kind of horror, so
Yeah.
you've nailed it.
Hell yeah.
You've got that thing you mentioned about obviously wanting to be an author when you grow up and stuff like that, and I think doing that in a way where it's not just, not to diminish writing a novel, obviously that's like a huge thing in and of itself, but doing something where it's telling a story, but it's telling everyone a different story, and people get their own experience, and something that you can only really do that in video games. There's like no other media where you can tell that kind of story and stuff like that. So that's kind of taking it to a whole new level in terms of like that wanting to be a storyteller, but the kind of story you can't tell anywhere else except video games.
Yes, I completely agree. A lot of the design of darkwebSTREAMER at the beginning was, I was very interested in making this kind of procedural narrative as a writing experiment and a writing challenge. So fundamentally, the question was, can I tell a story so well I can write a story that tells itself? And that's kind of been, we kind of think about every playthrough of darkwebSTREAMER as your own little short story. So every time you play, you're going to have, you're going to experience a story, but it should be very different to the last one that you experienced.
Yeah. Has that been like a massive challenge to kind of create, Tony, all of these like spooky different narratives weaving together? Has it been a weird experience, or are you kind of in with all of the horror stuff at this point because you've seen all sorts of nasties?
Well, so the technical challenge of implementing all these ideas is what originally attracted me to the game, although I'm a horror fan also. But the idea of being able to procedurally generate experiences, not just individual text or an individual story or website, which in itself is very interesting, but an entire narrative arc for a player's run through, a player's experience, is so much different than the type of dialogue that I had been working on previously. I wrote the dialogue tool, for instance, for Disco Elysium, and while the dialogue writing in that is just absolutely amazing, it's all handwritten and it's written ahead of time. And to have a chance to do something where I create a tool that writers can use to, as Chantal said, write a story that writes itself was a great challenge, a lot of fun. But then the setting of the game really hooked me. Horror, essentially is escapism, isn't it? It's fight or flight. That's why we all love zombie apocalypse fantasies, because you don't have to file taxes. You don't have to sit on customer service phone trees. It's just live or die. And to mix that, or there's a simplicity to that really makes the experience black and white. And of course, the game is beautiful black and white too. But it harkens back to the simplicity of the 1990s internet, which, from a narrative and setting perspective, really hooked me again, because the internet of the 2020s is really just a mess. Everything's a Well, take a look at Amazon. Back in the 1990s, it was just a scrappy bookstore that anyone around the world could share their opinions on books, and other people could just discover and have access to books that maybe they would never have access to otherwise. Similarly, with websites, you could hop on the web and come across a website just made by an individual, and you'd never know what you were going to encounter. But now we all know what Amazon is now. We all know the walled gardens of social media that are just echo chambers now. So to be able to recreate some of that Wild West, some of that unknown of the 1990s, really just tied into the same idea of creating things that are emergent, that we don't know what's going to happen ahead of time as writers. So those two things, the technical challenge and the setting, really sit so well together, and that's what got me excited about joining the project.
Yeah, honestly, it's so wild. Like the more you talk about it, the more it sounds like this self-referential meta experience where you're creating the creating something that creates itself is so exciting, and that it being the internet and AI being some part of it, it's like, ooh, it feels very of the moment with all the AI horrors happening at the moment as well. So yeah, I'm very excited. Ooh.
Thank you. And to seize on meta very quickly, we do have a really fun thing that we don't really get to talk about much, but we talk about a lot internally, and that is the fact that we do have like Twitch integration. So we do have this kind of, we have from day one, we have planned for this Twitch integration so that streamers can play the game with their viewers, and the viewers can kind of participate in shaping the game for the streamer. And there's this like really beautiful interaction that happens. So while, if you're playing the game solo, that's totally fine. You can enjoy it just the same on your own, and you get procedurally generated viewers. So we have, the language technology that we have developed that will, make these fake people that will fake talk to you, etc. But then if you're a streamer and you plug in to Twitch while playing the game, then your real life viewers will become the NPCs in the game. And so they can kind of chat along with you in the game, and they can kind of comment while role playing as these in-game characters on what is happening to you, etc. So, we're very excited about that meta aspect of being a streamer, playing a streamer to an audience that is both a fake audience but your real audience at the same time.
Do they have like a significant impact on kind of how the arc will develop in that playthrough as well? Because I'm just thinking a lot of streamers will have audiences that they wouldn't necessarily trust to lead them on a good path. Who like to torment the streamers. And
I'm well versed in Twitch. I was a streamer. Well, actually, I don't know how many people know this these days, but Twitch used to be a site called Justin TV. And so I was a streamer back in the Justin TV days, and I watched, kind of the whole development of Twitch going from not Twitch to what it is today. I also have a strange backstory where I actually was real life friends and acquaintances with some of the most famous streamers that have kind of come up on Twitch. We've known each other since we were teenagers, and I've, as an anthropologist particularly, I've been interested in watching their arcs of, going from obscurity into the limelight, which is actually, one of the major influences on darkwebSTREAMER as a whole, that, not always positive arc you see as someone catapults to fame. But I also used to make kind of like, I don't want to say plugins because that's a little too technical, but I would take bots that existed and I would kind of punch the crap out of them until they made a shape that was like an interesting new experience for streamers. So I used to kind of design Twitch experiences for people that allowed viewers and streamers to interact more. So I'm very aware of kind of the psychology of audiences as a whole, as well as individual viewers, and I know what their social dynamics can be like. And so we like to lean into that instead of away from it. And the main thing that, I account for in my head is just to make sure that they have options. Different kind of audiences are different depending on the streamer. So by saying, you as a streamer get to choose whether anyone can post in your in-game stream, or only subscribers, or only pre-approved people can, only, particular approved people can vote on particular choices that you're going to be doing in this playthrough, etc. So really just giving like a level of control to streamers instead of making decisions about their audiences and their interactions for them is kind of the way we're avoiding some of the mess while allowing for people to have experiences they want to have.
It feels like what you were saying, Phil, about having naughty audiences, feels like it kind of ties into the theme of the game as well, isn't it? Because if it's like occultism and having like this strange supernatural experience, like, are these people on your side or are they not? And they're actually people you know and can interact with. Again, it's just like another layer on top. Do you feel like you're kind of going to release this is such a late question, so please feel, but you could be welcome to say I have no idea, but do you think you're going to kind of release the game as is and let it kind of run, or do you think you're going to be able to make DLC that adds in new different adaptations and changes and unexpected levels after people become familiar with it, or do you think there's no way you can become familiar with it because of its generative state?
You want to field this one, Tony?
I think you have the best vision of this, but we are building an entire modding suite. In fact, the entire game is built using this modding suite, and it will let you completely change the game, add new content, add new events. There is a programming back into it, so it's really powerful and flexible. Chantal, I'll hand it over to you to describe your vision of the modding environment.
So the way I like to describe darkwebSTREAMER is that it is a living game, and that is because from day one it was made with a few things in mind. One was that Twitch integration, so we knew that in a way people were going to interact with it in a very kind of tangible and collaborative way. So in that way, to me it is living. But second, and one of the primary reasons we did decide to rebuild the game from scratch 2 years into development, was because I say this a lot, I want darkwebSTREAMER to be the most moddable game of all time. I believe in putting intentions out into the universe. So no pressure, Tony. I just say the things. He has to go do them.
I love that. Like, move over, Skyrim. It's time for darkwebSTREAMER. We're gonna get train dragons in there.
Hell yeah, like do it, dude. I've spent hundreds of hours modding Skyrim and other games. I started when I was like 9 or 8, maybe 8 or 9 on The Sims. I remember like having my mind blown that I could open a texture in Paint and like draw in like an 8-year-old's like bikini, not like 8-year-olds wearing bikinis, but an 8-year-old's rendition of a bikini, which was not elegant. And then having it show up in the game, and like it connected me to that game in a way that I did not know I could connect. Seeing that thing that you made be real in the thing that you're experiencing is, it's just, to go back to what you were saying, Phil, earlier, it's I'm at a loss. I'm like, it's such a almost spiritual experience. I'm struggling to that's how I'm gonna leave the description. It's a spiritual experience, I really think. And you know, I think that's a lot of where that supernatural strain comes in. Is trying to kind of like invoke constantly this spiritual nature of I think games. I've written about this before, and some people are going to be like, "What the hell is she on about?" But to me, there's something very, very magical about the fact that all of these game experiences we are having are just their energy. It's like we're just sending like spurts of energy into these containers, and they're getting kind of trapped in these containers, and then they're being sent to people all over the world, and then other people are like opening these containers, or connecting the little energy conduits in and receiving these things that we've made. And like I know it's like very banal to most people these days, but I've never quite gotten over how magical all of that seems. How I can kind of make something, or I can push a button here and like it will magically teleport to you. And then as creatives, being able to make experiences that are very, personal to us, and then being able to like beam them to people all over the world, and having people open them up and not just like play them, but like have their own spiritual responses to us kind of putting our spirits into things. The fact that people can be moved, that they can cry, that they can be afraid by these little like kind of energy boxes is, to me, that will never stop being a cult in a way. Like our own little Dybbuk boxes.
I was
Pulling
gonna
like
say
our
it's
spirits
like
out.
full circle, isn't it? Inspired by the Dybbuk box, and then you've got these Dybbuk boxes of people. Does this mean that you guys are going to be in there as little ghosts, little Tony ghosts, little Chantal ghosts in there, spirits?
I think our names are in there. But sorry, I went on a big ridiculous rant when I meant to be talking about modding. I'm so sorry I do this.
It
Um,
is
but
it's
look,
interesting that you said that, because like I was like kind of picking up, obviously there's different attitudes like developers have towards modders. Some are extremely protective of the product they've created, others are kind of more open to it, if it makes it more fun or whatever, that's great. Whereas you kind of gone, and again coming back to this whole thing that you can't do this with a book experience or whatever, like going, not only am I going to tell you it's a unique story for everyone, but you could also change it to suit your needs and actively encouraging you to go and mod it and do all that stuff, which I think kind of feeds into this idea that you were saying about just kind of parceling out these experiences to everyone, and then it's everyone's own interpretation in like the most literal way, because you can go and I'm going to completely change this and mod this using these tools, and it does kind of take it like that way. You're actively kind of saying, right, I've created this, but I don't own it anymore. You own it now. It's for you to go and have whatever experience you see fit with it and take it in that direction. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate interactive fan fiction in it, like being able to insert yourself in.
I love that. Yes. You guys are picking up what I'm putting down. I am very glad. But yeah, absolutely. The thing that excites me most about the project, and maybe Tony as well, talking about these kind of like modding and technical challenges, but like for Tony, he's really focused on making these technical challenges really smooth and like no longer challenges, because our focus, like, we have two focuses. One is just making a really fucking good game, like a crazy game that blows your mind. That's great. But the other part, and like the part we find genuinely equally important, is we want people to take this game when it's done, and we want them to put their own stories into the game and share those with other people. We want people who have never modded a game before. We want like writers, storytellers, and artists to be able to pick this game up and be like, oh shit, like this is really easy. I'm, for the first time ever, gonna make, a writer can say, I want to kind of like make this scary little interactive horror experience for people. And, that's really easy for them to do. And then they can upload it onto Steam Workshop. And, thousands, tens of thousands, I'm getting really ahead of myself here. Hundreds of thousands. But, it's, people can go and they can download that. And, me talking about how exciting it is. And in a way, like, spiritually satisfying to have things that, I make and we make be experienced by other people. We really want to, like, give that to people as well. We want other people to be able to make experiences that they can give to people. So in a way, darkwebSTREAMER is a game, but we have, like, made it a storytelling tool. So, like, I don't know if I've told Tony this, probably, but I'm like, I want you to be able to, like, take off the streamer overlay and that kind of, like, theme of the game and be able to, like, reskin it and retheme it to something else. I know in our community Discord server recently, people were talking about, like, ooh, it'd be cool to make it a strip club experience. So, like, you can go to the strip club, and I'm like, yeah, like, there's no real reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. Like, you should only be limited by your imagination.
Yeah. I want to
So,
see Slenderman stripper. That's great. I love that.
like, see, that's beautiful. This is all I want. I want people to just come up with batshit ideas and then make them, and then I can play them. That's what I want.
It's like spooky dreams, like as in the game Dreams. I guess nightmares would be more appropriate here, but like it's so different and so much more nuanced in loads of different ways as well. I love how you've taken all of the like most exciting parts of all these indie things, and it's like I say, it's just something completely new, but you can feel all of the love that's gone into it and making it a community. Sounds like it's like a community game more than anything else. I know I haven't even played it, it's not even out, but like, you know what I mean, like the concepts of it is really intriguing, especially as streamers, like as well, like Phil and I know the interacting with audiences and shaping them into your characters is such a fascinating part of it as well. All of it, yeah, really nice. Is there anything that you want to kind of highlight that you haven't had a chance to kind of talk about? Because I know the meta aspect and the modding aspect have kind of come out of our conversation. Is there anything else that's going on behind the scenes that you're like, man, I can't wait for people to see this?
Any thoughts, Tony?
Well, I can happily talk a little more about the technology behind the writing tools. Currently, many of the big thinkers in narrative design in video games are really talking about how procedural generation is the next big step in interactive experiences. And I really feel like we've done a good job of making that accessible to writers in a way that gives them authorial control. So it's not just bland procedural generation of standard text, but something that really lets them put their character into the writing, but in a way that is very flexible and is approachable to writers who don't have any experience programming or really any technical experience at all. So someone, a professional narrative designer, or even just a fan of the game, if they come up with a simple idea, they can add it to the game as a small experience, or they can do a total conversion, as Chantal said, and change the game into something entirely different because the game itself is made in the tool. So whatever we can do in the tool can be in the game.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things that intrigues me most, especially from like people think of procedural generation, and particularly in terms of roguelikes, and you talk about like people generally think you're talking about like procedural generation of like maps and levels and stuff like that, not so much of words, which seems so much more complicated to do because there's a limited number of kind of geometric shapes you kind of put together. I mean, and even that's complex. I've seen people like trying to get to grips with that and learning after the first time, the amount of times where the level they try and procedurally generate just doesn't exist or is missing half of it and stuff. So when you apply that to something as complex as writing, that just seems like an enormous task, not only to make it happen, but also, as you're saying, to make it accessible to people who have no programming knowledge and people who are just trying this stuff for the first time. So that just seems like huge to me.
Well, writing happens in the imagination too. So we do have the advantage that when a player reads some text, most of that geometric information, most of the kind of challenges that go into other types of procedural generation don't actually need to fit. And it'll fit in players' imaginations. Every player is very creative and they can make things fit. But at the same time, we do also model quite a lot, like the apartment that is generated when the player plays a run through of the game. And so if they need to go to the kitchen for something, there's a kitchen in the game, and that's actually modeled. It's modeled in more of a data sense, and it's described through text. It's not shown as a map or a 3D rendering or anything. So that is one of the advantages of a mostly text-based game with supplemental graphics for things like websites. So you can, again, browse the entire procedurally generated internet and find all kinds of information. That information also is all procedurally generated and can be modded by players.
Mhm. And I'll quickly mention that the apartment in the game, every time you play, is also procedurally generated. So every, we call them screeners, which is your character that you make every time you play a run through. They will have their own unique apartment in the game every time. So, maybe a character loves cats or something. So they might have like a bunch of cat paintings around the walls, or like cat wallpaper or cat clock or something like that. So, we pretty much wherever we can make things unique to your playthrough, we do. And, something I do want to talk about, I think Tony and I, we don't talk about it in like things like interviews or even with each other very much because, we focus on one system at a time and there are many, many systems in the game. And we call them NPPs, not NPCs. It's our little studio rule that is non-player person, and that's kind of just a psychological trick to engage with designing our NPPs more as real characters that we respect and that have their own inner lives. So something that I'm really excited about is just all of the characters that are generated in the game every time. Every run through of darkwebSTREAMER is a kind of like a fixed world. So the world is generated at the beginning of your playthrough. And so, many characters are like born into the world with their own backstories, their own relationships, their own personalities, linguistic styles. So, like the way they speak is very unique to them. And the thing we haven't gotten to yet, but I have masses of plans for, is just like that they live their own lives as they play the game. So for me, when I'm obviously a huge gamer to be making games at all, but something that I've always loved, the very rare times that I encounter it, is when the game doesn't treat you like you are the only center of the universe. So I want to be dropped into a world that exists with or without me, that doesn't really care about me, but that I can affect and that I can impact. And so, going into making, I get to make a game. The cool thing about making a game is like you can just kind of make the game that you always wished existed with all the stuff that you wished other games had. And that was the thing that I really wanted. So having these MPPs that live their own lives every single day external to you. Sometimes that will interact with you and your playthrough, but sometimes it won't. That's something I'm really excited about. So the fact that when you interact with characters in the game, they actually, in a way, they are real. They have traumas and aspirations and jobs and families, and they can live and they can die, and they can acquire personality traits just the way you can. It's kind of like the little rule in the game that if the player can do it or have it, then the NPCs can also do it or have it. So, yeah, I'm really excited for people to kind of discover, what there is to discover about the other people in the game. The thing, the whole thing about the internet is like the internet is people. And like that is why we've had such a huge focus on people when designing the game, and designing people themselves. Is just, you can't really have an internet without people, and you can't procedurally generate websites without those websites having something to talk about. And if you go and you look at the old web, which I'll say something that is probably important for people to realize and to know is that Dark Web Streamer is set kind of in like the early 90s, like early to mid. It's anachronistic, so we've taken like modern influencer culture and we have put it in this kind of like 90s, early 2000s context. And the golden rule, as Tony kind of hinted at earlier, was the internet of today is very different to the internet of years past. And that's because today's internet has become dominated by capitalism and corporations. So, I was reflecting just recently that the term surf the web used to be ubiquitous. That was something that people literally used to do. They'd be like, oh, what are you doing? Just surfing the web. Like that was a thing. And we don't say that anymore because you can't really surf the web. You can we doom scroll now, which is kind of a horrific like slurp that we've slid down from like surfing to doom scrolling. But we used to, but those who are unfamiliar, the old internet it was just like made up of mostly personal websites that people would make, either about themselves or about things they were interested in, or they would just like teach you how to do things because they liked them. Yeah, they were just deeply personal pages, and you could just go from one to another. There were things called web rings, or people would link to other sites that were like their sites, or just their friends' sites they would link to. And so you could kind of just hop from one personal page made by a regular person to another. They always had these like custom graphics that everyone had their own kind of aesthetic style, so you were always kind of like peeking into people's heads in a way that was really, really beautiful and very like connecting. So when we talk about the dark web, while we do have inspirations from the modern dark web, I think of the old internet as the real dark web, because that was when there was no indexation. That was before Google. There weren't international task forces around to bust nefarious rings around the place. You could easily commit crimes in front of everybody because no one had any mechanisms to stop them. Pretty much everyone, not just me, we all saw some pretty awful shit when the internet was young, because there was nothing to really stop that. So yeah. Dark Web Streamer is very much a place that remembers this old internet that was built by people. And I'll end this with our golden rule for making content in the game. That is no corporation. So everything in the game is made by a person or like a little like cute group of like people who have banded together, but there's no Big Brother, there's no, version of Twitter or, there are no Zuckerbergs or Musks or whatever. It is literally just a place made up of people, being their vulnerable, authentic selves, even if their selves are absolutely batshit.
It sounds like old school MySpace a little bit as well, like being able to scroll those, like the spirit of MySpace living on in dark web
We
streamer.
do actually have that. We have a site called Dark Hole. And that is the
Yay!
closest we get to kind of, the corporation. But, MySpace was just started by Tom. Good old Tom. Just a
love Tom.
guy.
Yeah, I just when you were talking as well about all the NPCs kind of having their own kind of internal lives and stuff, and then obviously with it being a horror, like I started thinking about like the film Free Guy where the NPCs kind of come to life and stuff. But then thinking like a horror twist on that. So like, yeah, if ever like when the modern tools, like the idea of like the game coming to life because the audience comes to life in a way, like just seems like there's something there. But yeah, that was just my imagination firing off because you said that about the way the NPCs or MPPs, sorry, are constructed.
Egregores. This idea of like an idea coming to life just because of the energy of people believing in it. It's actually something we do lean into in the game.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be very, I think, very cool to see not only the game itself, but also kind of how people engage with it, interact with it off stream, but also streamers doing it. And I think there's so much potential there for like so many things, like from everything that you've described and the tech involved in it and stuff. So it's all going to be extremely exciting to see. Um,
I hope so.
So before we kind of wrap things up, you've mentioned you avid gamer yourself, and we're in another year of like so many fantastic horror games, just like the last year. Like we got Renaissance. Have you had much chance to play other stuff and see what other people have been putting out this year, or has it all been kind of focus on just the development?
Good question. I definitely do not get the chance to play games the way I used to. It pretty much died with starting to make a game. But I do. I'm not much of a kind of play things when they come out. I tend to slowly accumulate games I'm interested in. When the mood strikes me, I'll kind of go and play that one. So not necessarily a new, but I mean there was a really cool smaller experience that I did play in the last 12 months that was released in the last 12 months. And that was called I think it was Amanda the Explorer. Are you guys familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those kind of like short and sweet little experiences that like dump on you and then just like make you feel kind of weird and then like I'm out. Job done, let's go. And yeah, so just little things like that. I have a 10-year-old son and he actually um he brings me horror games when he bumps into them. So he's like, I saw a YouTube video about a game you really like. And so, like, we'll sometimes go play it or I'll watch him play it. So, a lot of uh, my modern horror gaming experiences are just kind of my little human magpie dropping cool indie experiences on my doorstep. Um, Roblox. He plays a lot of horror on Roblox. I'm a big fan of just the creativity coming out in that space, particularly. I think, people around our age bracket are really missing out on the like coolest, most creative horror experience made today. I don't think, if you don't have a kid, you probably aren't hanging out in Roblox. Maybe it would be weird too. It might be weird too. But, it is a shame in a way because we're seeing some really, really cool stuff coming there. And I think, some of the great new designers of the new generation are coming up in Roblox making stuff. And I think, more and more as years go by, we're going to be hearing about developers, like great horror developers who got their start in, their first game was on Roblox, and it was cool, and they got a reputation there, and now they're famous. I'm really looking forward to those, actually. Maybe it'll be my kid.
I mean, that would be apt, given how you started with the wandering around the Chucky doll.
Yeah. I tried to cultivate it, and he was a little less horror immune than at that age. To my sadness, I had to wait and be patient. What about you, Tony? We don't talk about games much other than ours.
No, unfortunately I haven't had an opportunity to play many of the larger horror games. They're on my Steam list, as are a gazillion others, but I have played a lot of smaller indie horror games on itch, mostly short, free experiences. There are a couple developers I follow, like Duck Made of Wood, who just make point and clicks or visual novels in the horror genre. And frankly, given the workload of creating this game, it's a lot easier to just get a concentrated, small indie experience like that and just sit down for an evening and scare myself with those.
Oh, it seems like the
yeah.
best way to kind of get inspiration and to create your own horror experiences is to go into these indie places and see what people are thinking of. Like one of my favorite pastimes is going to Reddit and just reading through all the no sleep amateur authors, kind of testing the waters. And it's like that for gaming on itch and in Roblox, and seeing people kind of feel out ideas that have loads of potential. That haven't really been seen. You get a lot of formulaic stuff. You get a lot of stuff that hasn't been thought about or seen before, because it's on such a small, weird scale as well. So I think that's a really good way of kind of honing that into your narratives as well. Like, you can be inspired by, your Silent Hills, your Resident Evils, your PTs, but saying that your guy's own consuming of horror comes from the indie sphere itself, and deep in the indie sphere, I think speaks volumes to how the game is going to come together from that appetite as well.
Yeah, I like
Oh yeah.
games that are just like rough, a single person had a vision and made it, rather than larger games made by committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of just like pulled like the throbbing heart out, and you just like threw it down. You're like, this is what a heart looks like. But I will say, real quick, touching on the on that note, no sleep. So I wrote my English thesis on creepypastas, and no sleep is kind of like the herm of creepypastas. So I did want to quickly drop that a lot of dark web streamers, events, etc., is very much inspired by creepypastas. I don't steal them, but in a way, I would love to, not not out of thievery, but out of love letters. I would love to be like, here's this really cool thing that you wrote and that people really resonated with, and guess what? You can come and like experience this like really creepy experience here. That's actually one of the reasons why modding was so important to me, and making it easy for storytellers to make experiences was really important, because as a commercial game, we cannot, we can't take existing ideas. As much as we would love to really lean into that kind of like reference culture, we can't too much. But what we can do is we can open the door to other people sharing experiences that they love, or that they've made with other people. So someone else being able to go make the Slender Man event in the game, or be able to put SCP events into the game, or entities into the game, and all of these really cool, like awesome, beautiful internet culture, like especially horror internet culture things. Like, that is the goal, is we want to be this kind of like herm of internet horror and interactive experience.
Man, I love the concept of the no sleep writers and kind of owners of these IPs going in and going, oh, I've made this thing on the internet. Let me put it into this game of this internet as well. Again, the meta layers. Jeff the Killer coming through. You know,
Hell yeah.
I think that's a really neat idea. Like even no clipping out into the back rooms and having like a separate kind of idea through that as well, and that it's just available to everyone. Like I have no idea about game dev as as just a player, so you making those tools available for passionate horror freaks is definitely really, really interesting.
Yep. And again, there's like so many. I think there's so many reasons just from what we've talked about today to like be really excited for this, and to see what comes out of it. So thank you again for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And as with most things, the main thing I'm presuming you want people to do is make sure they wishlist the game and show their support there. So we'll provide links for people in the description of the video to do that. But yeah, any last thoughts before we wrap things up? Anything last kind of call to action for players of the game? Anything you want people to do, or is it just the wish list the main thing?
We do love when people wish list. It is such a nice thing to do. Obviously, Patreon also a nice thing to do. We do have a Patreon that runs playtests. We actually have one going right now for our Patreon subscribers, but by the time it's out, it will probably be finished, but there will be more. So if people like the idea of what they're hearing and want to support us, we are fully solo independent developers. We are not published by anyone. We are supported by an amazing community. So yeah, there's that. And speaking of amazing community, we do have a Discord server that we love to meet dark web streamer fans and interested people in. So you can actually hit up our website, www.darkwebstreamer.com, which is something I suggest you just do for funsies anyway, because, talking about meta, we tried really hard to make it more or less the kind of website that you would stumble on, 20 years ago on the old internet. I actually wrote most of it by hand in Notepad, the way I used to when I was 12 making websites. So very old school techniques. Then Tony came and saved us for mobile. Thank you, Tony. Because those don't convert so good. But yeah, go check out the website. There's lots of stuff to discover. It's we may or may not have an ARG that you can find. That is quite deep and complex. So yeah, there's a lot of dark web stuff already for you to play with if you kind of keep your eyes and ears open. It's kind of a game to hunt it down and find. So yeah, you can come find us, chat to us on Discord, or yeah, play the game when it's done.
Brilliant. And yeah, so as I say, all links in the description. If people who are watching this or listening to this podcast want to support Dark Web Streamer in any way that they're able to, please do. And thank you again, guys, for coming along, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
This has been Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. Thank you very much for listening. Check out the links in the description for more info on where to follow our guests in order to support them and keep up to date with their work. The Horror Game Awards will be airing live on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to avoid missing out on what promises to be a very exciting night of awards and game reveals, as well as future episodes of this podcast and other content. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.